those who would care to ask questions, I'd rather have them, all of you closer here, because some of you are too far away. Can you move on a little bit here, please? We did hold consultations today at the Security Council, where we discussed two issues. The first was the situation in Iraq, and then under other matters, the Russian delegation raised the situation in Ukraine. On the situation in Iraq, we heard a briefing from Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, Special Representative of the Secretary General in Iraq and the head of UNAMI. And the members of the Council authorized me to make a few comments which are resulting from our discussion. First of all, I want to say that the members of the Security Council are united in their attitude to the situation in Iraq, and members of the Security Council expressed their unanimous support to the government and people of Iraq in their fight against terrorism. They stressed that all actions should be within the constitutional framework and comply with the international humanitarian law and human rights standards. They strongly condemned all terrorist and extremist activities regardless of their motivation. They also stressed the importance of inclusive national dialogue, and a particular opportunity for that will be provided because of the formation of the new parliament and the new government in Iraq. They expressed, they urged the Iraqi government and the international community to support UNAMI, especially in its activities in response to the humanitarian crisis. So those are the comments which I was authorized to make on behalf of members of the Security Council.
The issue of some neighboring countries, for example, interfering in Iraq or going in support of the government or otherwise,
no, that issue was not raised. No.
Was there any discussion of military equipment taken by ISIL from Mosul, and what's the estimate of how it could be used in Syria or elsewhere?
No, no.
Ambassador, just to follow up on the point that was already made, what would be your position if other countries got involved?
I don't answer theoretical questions, please. Please.
Yes. Ambassador, you mentioned Syria. I heard that you mentioned Syria inside a closed session. So do you see that there is a link between the situation in Iraq and the situation in Syria?
First of all, one colleague made a kind of a general comment about the regional repercussions of the situation in Iraq. I also sort of picked up this point and said that we need to have a fresh look at what is going on there, which in my view should also have an impact on our thinking about the settlement of the crisis in Syria. And also there is another kind of a regional dimension, and this is the dimension of terrorism. Clearly, the war on terrorism is not over. The terrorists do not agree with that assumption that the war on terrorism is over. They keep fighting and even intensifying their activities. So one thing which the Russian delegation suggested that we do in the Security Council is to have a briefing from the Secretariat to have a look at the broader terrorist activity problem in the Middle East. So I hope next week we'll be organizing that. Please, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Two questions. First, is the Security Council contemplating any action, any possible measures, even against ISIL, stronger, wider in response to this?
No suggestions to that effect have been made.
As a second point, are you going to talk about the introduction of the draft resolution on Ukraine?
Yes, as soon as we are through with Iraq, I'll go back to this.
Ambassador, how much of this is this unrest a result of the sectarian fracturing in the Iraqi government versus the spillover from Syria? And second of all, how does Envoy Mladenov see the violence spreading beyond northern regions to possibly Baghdad and elsewhere?
Yes, there is that concern, I think, which was reflected in Mr. Mladenov's comments, even though I think he was quite assured in that Baghdad is well protected and the government is in control. So there is no immediate, at least this is the way I understood him, there is no immediate danger of the violence spreading towards or to Baghdad. As to you said spilling over from Syria, that is not the situation. That is not the situation. I think the situation is that there is a terrorist activity in the Middle East, and it's coming from different directions. Maybe some of those terrorists who are fighting now in Iraq have come from Syria, but mostly they are moving to the region from other directions, and so it's kind of a mixed bag thing. As to the sectarian problem, yes, it was discussed at length, and that's why we emphasized in our remarks, which I delivered on behalf of the members of the Security Council, to have all-inclusive dialogue. Clearly that things are not well in the interaction between various political factions, various religious groups in Iraq, and there must be a strong and intensified effort to start this dialogue. And as I said, I think it's kind of an opportunity, which Mr. Mladenov has also mentioned. They're having a new parliament. This parliament has not been able to convene to consider a request for introducing the emergency situation, which the Prime Minister has made. But the new parliament, we hope it will be a fresh start. This is a great opportunity for a fresh start in having all-inclusive political dialogue and also in resolving the multitude of issues. Social issues, the issues of oil, who is controlling oil revenues and things like that. So a lot is to be done, but the more immediate thing is to reach some kind of accommodation between the main political forces to make it easier for them all to fight the terrorists.
So you believe that the government should take the initiative to start this new approach? Or is it the government's responsibility?
I think it's always important for the government. Since you are a government, you need to take initiative. So if the government takes that initiative, which I'm sure they're thinking about, that I think would be a great initiative. Please.
When can we expect the voting on your resolution on Ukraine?
I have not yet moved on to Ukraine.
What about the Kurds?
Maybe.
Some of the language of the presidential or the press statement which was issued yesterday was emphasizing that countries of the region and other countries in the world should implement the sanctions on these terrorist groups. Also, we heard today from a GCC country a voice saying that what's happening in Iraq is an uprising by certain groups. Is that message sent by the Security Council to those countries who are sponsoring and supporting terrorists, and your capacity or in your presidential
I think we sent that message in our statement yesterday. But clearly, of course, the danger of terrorism is there, and there is strong terrorist activity by this ISIL group. But also there is this other segment, which is sometimes intertwined with this terrorist activity. And that creates a much more complex situation, which needs to be resolved through the means of inclusive political dialogue. Constitution should be upheld and observed in various measures which are being taken, and the other things which I've referred to in my statement.
Iraq has presented a list of those countries and names of people who are supporting the ISIL.
I'm not aware of that. I've not seen. I'm not.
You'll discuss UNAMI's mandate next month to renew the mandate. Do you believe that this mandate should be changed in a way?
We'll see. There is a long stretch between today. The situation is evolving rapidly. Of course, if there is a need to adjust the mandate to the current situation, we'll try to do that. Well,
discussion of the Kurds. Do they actually now control territory through the Peshmerga, and should the government be doing more?
It's a very volatile situation. So I do not want to mislead you. I'm sorry.
Steps that you're going to take for support of the government?
Well, I made the statement. We support UNAMI. We think Mr. Mladenov is doing a great job. He clearly has a very clear understanding of the situation, very realistic, pragmatic. He is in contact with the main players. We, as far as Russia is concerned, would not mind. I mean, the Secretary General did talk to the Prime Minister of Iraq yesterday on the phone. So there needs to be a strong effort from the United Nations. There is this effort, including on the humanitarian front. That's why we urged the Iraqi government and the international community to support them in that effort. Please.
The Syrian Authority as well as the Iranian president this morning expressed their readiness to support the Iraqi government. Do you have any comment on this?
I don't. Shall we move to Ukraine?
You said earlier earlier that the mission has not been accomplished. What do you mean by that, Ambassador?
Mission has not been accomplished. Well, I expressed our sort of national assessment of what is going on, because, and I did refer to that briefly in our discussion and the consultations, because you cannot understand correctly what is going on now without knowing the background of things. In fact, that what happened in 2003 was not just toppling a dictator, but also trying to change the entire structure of a country, which existed, some experts say, almost a millennium. And the effort to change that structure had not been successfully accomplished by the time the US troops left the country. The same, I would suggest, applies to the power agencies, the army and other power agencies. I think what is going on there, and there were some strong words said about disintegration of the armed forces in the north of the country, reflects the fact that, among other things, that the reconstruction of the power agencies, the armed forces of Iraq had not been completed. So this is definitely, in our mind, the background of the current crisis.
Does that apply to the situation in Afghanistan, in your opinion?
I don't want to generalize.
What would be the role now of Syria with the crisis in Iraq? Because they share the border, and then we know that these terrorist groups are coming back and forth.
I'm not prepared to address that. I'm not prepared to address that. Let's move to Ukraine. Well, you know that the Security Council has been discussing repeatedly the situation in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Security Council has never been able to make impact to produce a call to stop violence, and it so happens that every time the Security Council fails to do that, there is a new dramatic increase in violence. I recall with regret that when we were having this an official meeting of the Security Council on Ukraine, we asked our colleagues to support a call to end violence. It was not done, and on the same day, on the 2nd of May, the massacre in Odessa happened. Now, on the 2nd of June, we introduced a draft resolution calling to end violence in Ukraine. Again, we did not get the support from some members of the Security Council. On that day, a missile attack was carried by a Ukrainian jet fighter against the administrative building in Lugansk, where 8 civilians were killed. And now we are seeing continuation of violence. We have heard statements coming from President-elect Poroshenko, then President Poroshenko after his swearing in on the 7th of June that he was going to end violence. And there are numerous contacts going on, including contacts between Russia and Ukraine, a meeting between President Putin and President-elect then Poroshenko in Normandy. Then I heard reports, not confirmed officially to me, that of a phone conversation between President Putin and President Poroshenko, and we are talking to Ukrainians through various formats. We are supporting the activity of OSCE. Unfortunately, I think that from some quarters we see certain reluctance to implement the roadmap of the chair in person of OSCE. And in our view, it is important, continues to be important for the Security Council to play a role, and for the United Nations to increase its role in trying to settle the situation in Ukraine and to stop violence. So we did introduce a new draft resolution today. In some respects, it goes along the lines of the previous resolution we introduced, but of course it reflects more the current situation as it exists now. It calls on all the parties to refrain from actions endangering the lives and security of the civilian population, civilian infrastructure, and humanitarian goods. It calls on them to immediately end violence and agree to a sustained ceasefire. In fact, we also have a reference, a new disturbing phenomenon. There is news, there are reports about the use of white phosphorus munition in the course of fighting by the Ukrainian side, and we believe that there should be international attention to the use of prohibited munitions. This is not the first time prohibited munitions have been used in the course of fighting by the Ukrainian side. First reports of white phosphorus munitions, we are very disturbed about it. We call for a full implementation of all provisions of the roadmap of OSCE chairman in person, and we request the Secretary General of the United Nations to support OSCE chair in person in his efforts to implement the roadmap, in particular with regard to the cessation of violence and launching of all-inclusive Ukrainian dialogue involving all political forces and regions of the country, including with a view to reaching agreement on the principles of constitutional reform. So this is a short text, but it covers, I think, the gamut of issues which we have now in front of us in eastern Ukraine, both the ending of violence, humanitarian aspect of it, and also helping the political process and the efforts of OSCE in this regard. Please.
Ambassador, can I ask what the progress is with the negotiation on the Syrian humanitarian resolution, and ask
Are there questions on Ukraine?
No, I'm going to ask you the follow-up, which is this Ukraine resolution an attempt to insert that into this negotiating process? Is this part of a quid pro quo?
No, it has nothing to do with it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Since we haven't seen the resolution, several of the West European ambassadors indicated that they would not accept a resolution that did not reassert Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Is that mentioned in the draft?
You know, various concepts, various ideas were made. We did not have a very long discussion of this. 5 or 6 colleagues spoke, making some initial comments, some support of the draft. Some colleagues were making various suggestions. We agreed that we'll have an expert meeting tomorrow to try to accomplish this very quickly.
The reaction of your partners on your draft resolution, and when do you expect the voting?
I'm sorry, are you listening to what I'm saying? I have doubts sometimes, you know. Пожалуйста.
Since there is a new draft resolution, what happened to the previous one on the humanitarian?
Well, the previous one is still on the table, but some new nuances have emerged on the practical front, on the political front, so it's an update of the draft. Obviously, this draft is overtaking the one which we introduced previously.
The OSCE today reached some kind of an operating agreement with the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and the OSCE did, and Navi Pillay. They announced that they had an agreement. Since the OSCE has said that they believe a Ukrainian jet bombed the building in Lugansk, but the UN has yet to say that. Do you think the two should work together on this report for the 17th? Or do you think the UN's done enough on Lugansk?
We do, and we continue to insist that there should be a clear message from the United Nations. We hope that Mr. Shimonovich's report, which is going to be delivered on the 17th, I think, will have a clear picture of what has happened, not just elusive statements that they are gathering information, because there is plenty of information in that regard. But we are following this, keeping track of developments in this regard very closely.
Ambassador, are you still calling for humanitarian corridors in this resolution?
Sorry?
Are you still calling for humanitarian corridors?
Let me see. I don't think there is a direct reference to that. No.
Mr. President, there was some talk about tanks crossing from Russian
I have no
side.
information. I have no information to that. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
No, I was wondering, are you worried that the start of the World Cup, they starting today, distracts the public opinion, world public opinion on the big crisis like the one in Ukraine, and this is the right moment if somebody wants to intensify a crisis, you know, to use the distraction of...
It does not distract us in the Security Council, let me tell you. Those are completely
You don't need
different.
the support of public opinion when there is
Those are completely different things. Though I am going to be there at the ceremony in the Indonesian lounge for the kickoff, but it does not distract us from anything.